All right. Now, if you're familiar with Zoom, you probably know about some of the reaction buttons. So there's some reaction buttons that you can use. If you don't see them right now and you click on participants, you probably will see that there's a green check mark, a red X for no, green check mark for yes, go slower, go faster. There's also two reaction buttons, which include a thumbs up and a hand clapping. So if you like what's happening, then you can certainly identify that you like that by using those two symbols. And sorry, working from home, you have other people, you have cats, you have all sorts of distractions. It'll be fun. All right. I think we are a few minutes overdue. I know that, like I said, Bet was here a few minutes ago, but she has now left. She said she'll come back. So I am going to slowly but surely get started on our content for today, which is talking about buyers and buyer consultations. So I am just going to share out my PowerPoint file for you. You know, I tell you, we should have told everybody it started at 10. Then everybody would have been here a few minutes early. All right, so today we're going to talk about buyer representation and working with buyers. I think one of our primary goals with working in real estate is that we want those buyer and seller transactions to happen so that we are able to focus where we focus best, which is helping those buyer and seller clients to be able to achieve their real estate results. So this session I called I Only Work with Clients, and because of today's current situation, we have to learn how to do virtual buyer consultations. So once I'm done, there's a combination of both the learning aspect, but also a sample of my presentation included here. And we've got a bit of an activity to make sure that you are much more comfortable with working with clients and being able to transition all of those leads, those warm leads that you have, into becoming a client. Now, I know that as we work along, you may have some questions. So I'd love for you to, unmute yourself when you're ready so that you can ask a question. As I said before, today's session is a workshop, not a lecture. So there will be an activity that I'll break everybody up into small groups and you can work on it and come back and give us a little sample of your practice session. So ultimately, in the end, we want to make sure that we're really comfortable with the buyer representation agreement and transitioning people from a prospect to a lead to an actual client. That is our goal. So when you think about the difference between clients and customers, there is a long list of differences. So to differentiate the two, clients have this very long list over on the left that talks about all of the elements that are involved with being a client. So if I was a client or if I was a person and I didn't know the difference one to the next, I might think, well, is the only difference between this is, do I have to pay you a commission or not? Most people just go to the money side. They don't realize that the elements involved with being a customer or a client are vastly different. So let's start with the shorter list, which is the customer aspect. So when you are a customer, there are really two aspects that we owe a customer. We owe them care and to ensure that we are skillfully completing documentation on their behalf. And we owe them honesty, so we're not allowed to trick them. Now, that list is short, it's concise, and that is the end of that list. If you go and look at the side of clients, we owe them the same two items, but then we also have the obligation to obey their requests, to carry out their requests in terms of anything that is legal. So if you get a request that is not a legal request, of course, that cannot be carried out. That sort of goes against what we are trying to do here. However, most other requests, you would obey your client. Your client, we become representing a brokerage, the brokerage as the agent. That is our obligation. We will act on behalf of our clients. Our clients' needs come before our own. We will maintain strict confidentiality. So if our clients tell us something, that something stays with us. It doesn't go anywhere else. It just strictly stays with us. We have the obligation to negotiate. So I hope some of you have been practicing up on your negotiation skills, because that set of skills will be really important when it comes to negotiating the best possible price for your clients. We also have the obligation when we're working with a client to disclose information. So material facts, anything that needs to be disclosed, even if it's where we're affiliated with the seller in some way, all of those disclosure items. I think the general rule on disclosure is if you're not sure, disclose. We can debate that when we get a little further along. And then the mandates of the client become your mandates. So whatever the client is looking for, that is what you are looking for. Now, I don't know, some of you probably are part and parcel of many of those online chats and online groups on Facebook. And I saw one the other day, and somebody had posted a comment saying, how would you take this? And it was a request to cancel the Stratus prospect match. And in the message she wrote, "You've never sent me anything that was suitable, and everything that you sent me didn't match what I told you I wanted. It's almost like you're not listening to me." Well, that's where I give you the example of the mandates of the client become your mandates. So it also is important that we are taking those and following up and making sure that we are meeting those mandates. So that long list is easily how you could decipher between Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, would you like to become a client? And these are the responsibilities I have with you as you become a client. Or if you wish, you can maintain your status as a customer, and these are the start and the finish of the responsibilities I have for you as a client. All right, so this one's long, but I thought it was really important. It has to do with the fiduciary obligations to a client. Now, I'll give you a couple of minutes just to review this. And again, this session has been recorded, so you can always refer back to it later on. But I'll give you a moment or two just to have a look through it. I'm sorry, I just had to change the screen size for you. All right, so for how many of you recall this? Way back when you were studying to get your registration, do you recall this list of items that were presented to you? I don't hear anybody. Does this not sound familiar? I think I heard somebody click.
Yeah, it was me, yes.
You're very, very quiet out there. Do you recall this long laundry list of items?
I do.
Yes. And so this list is probably one of the lists that, and thank you for the response. Now I know that I'm not out there all by myself in the world. I feel so much better already. So this long list is probably the list that you recall studying when we were first getting registered, but then after that, a lot of us don't refer back to this when we're talking to our clients. So that's one of the things that I like to have you look at in terms of the short list, which is easy to identify, quick, relatively simple when it comes to being able to clarify the one side over the other, versus the technical aspect of what each of those elements refer to. So this is really the, sort of the legalese of all of the elements of the fiduciary obligations and general obligations, duties to a client, versus the prior one, which is a short, easy to remember, easy to describe list of elements. All right, so the difference then between a client and a customer is again shortened here, where as a client, you're going to explain the property type, geographic location section, the commission clauses. We're actually going to do these as an activity. The commission clause, you're going to explain the representation clause, and you're going to explain the referral of property clauses. And I've got I'll even share with you a buyer representation agreement so that you'll be able to do this in your groups. And then confirm the buyer's understanding of all of those. So this is really where a lot of us tend to kind of gloss over what is in those contracts. And why do you think we tend to gloss over them? What do you think is happening? Anybody have an idea why we might tend to gloss over the items in the buyer rep?
Just to not get so complicated. They start asking so many questions, it gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and questions sometimes are an indication that they don't understand, which is important. What else do you think is the reason why we tend to gloss over this stuff? We tend to fill it out. We tend to give it to them. We tend to tell them they can be a client or a customer. We present them with a piece of paper, but we don't really go into many details as to what's in here.
I think a lot of agents act, and I think I would include myself in this, but I think a lot of agents treat a customer the way they would treat a client.
Yes. And you know what the big problem is with that, Suzanne? And I have to admit, I'm the same, which is why when I put this program together, it's because I want to get better at doing this as well. So this helps me emphasize on things that I should be doing in order to do better business. So I definitely think that we do that. And the problem with us treating customers as clients is what?
Liability.
Yeah, there's a huge liability because I remember Roy St. John saying, well, now you're in the position of implied agency.
Mm-hmm.
You are now responsible for all the elements of having this person as your client, and you have none of the protection. So if you do something wrong, there's no protection in there for you. So we really do have to decide upfront. And that's why I started this program by saying, I only work with clients. And if you set your foot down, I'm starting to see that many other people in our real estate community are starting to also set their foot down and say, this is the way I work. have you ever heard a potential buyer client saying, well, I don't want to sign anything?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So if you're hearing that, it's because other people are letting them get away with it. And perhaps you have also let them get away with it in the past. But we can change things going forward. It's just a matter of learning the best way to do that in order to be able to, ensure that people understand all the benefits that they're getting, right? All of these benefits that they're getting as clients will help them understand the reason why you want to invest the time with them and have them as a client, and you want them to invest the time with you. It really becomes like a two-way partnership. All right, so again, here are the fiduciary responsibilities. Again, I've got them duplicated in different formats. This one's only a 5-part one, but you'll see that all of these are complicated. It's long-winded, and this is probably the biggest reason most of us don't actually do this. Am I saying that that's right? No, in fact, I'm saying let's do it better. So that we know these things are there, we're going to drill them into the back of our heads, but we're going to be able to describe them in a way that we are comfortable, and therefore making our clients comfortable with the process as well. All right, so things that you will discuss with your buyer clients. Things that you will discuss is that you will be working exclusively with me to purchase a property as described in our agreement. That's the BRA, and I'm going to share out a copy of it in just a second. If you learn of any properties as described in our agreement that you're interested in, you must let me know. If you do find a property you are interested in purchasing, the offer will be submitted through my brokerage to the seller. If you purchase a property as described in our agreement without the involvement of my brokerage, you will still be obligated to pay commission. So these 4 elements are part of the buyer representation agreement. How many of you think these statements are a little bit harsh? And sorry, I can't see if you raise your hand just because my PowerPoint is blocking your faces, so I can't see if you've got this look of utter disdain and disgust on your face. But these are actually part of the buyer representation agreement.
I think they're okay.
Excellent. Well, they are there. That's what they are. All right, I'm just going to come out of the PowerPoint for a second, and I'm going to share out with all of us the going back and forth. So I'm just going to share out with all of us the element of, hang on 2 secs. Now I realize why everybody else has problems getting back and forth with, there we are, getting back and forth in terms of finding the elements that they need. All right, so I'm just going to share out a document with you. Hopefully you'll get it. If not, if you've got a copy of the buyer representation agreement, that would be extremely helpful. But if not, don't worry about it. You can take some notes with just a piece of scratch paper, that's fine. But give me 2 seconds and I'll share this out with you. All right, so here it is, Form 300, the Buyer Representation Agreement. So in the agreement, we filled these out. We've all filled these out many, many, many times for many, many, many people, some of which we only did it at the time they were actually putting in their offer, and some we did it maybe any time throughout the process, and some we didn't do it at all. And next thing you know, these people walk away and we're wondering, like scratching my head saying, what happened? What went wrong? So the buyer representation agreement, this is the new one. There's an older one. This one was updated, and you can actually see on the form, this was revised. At the bottom of the form, it says revised 2020. So this is one of the new ones. They revise them periodically. So just check if you've downloaded a bunch of forms for use, just double check that you're using the most up-to-date one, because they do change them from time to time. So in here, the first element here is the commencement part of the agreement. So we're not going to talk about the brokerage because we know that. We're not going to talk about the buyer because you know who the buyer would be. If you are doing FinTrack at the time you are filling this out, you may have their address. It is probably not a bad idea to take the photo ID early. And just again, it's all part of your process. Then next, the time frame of the contract. And just double check that you're not filling this in. This is the 6-month clause. So if this contract exceeds 6 months, so the start to the end is over 6 months, then you must have the initials of the buyer. If the contract is under 6 months, you must not have the initials of the buyer. Now, one of the things that's confusing is in the new form, there's 2 of these circle things. So I find a lot of people just automatically go and have the buyer fill this in and fill this in. This one would be incorrect if it's under 6 months. So just cautious on that. Next, it's the buyer, the property type and the geographic location. So you're going to take a peek at both of those, and I'm going to have one group work on that. The definitions are in here, and here is the commission clause. So when we break down into our groups, I'm going to have one group work on the first 2 items, one group work on the commission clause, and within the commission clause, there talks about lots of different things that if you're not paying attention, you might be surprised at everything that's in here. So I'm really going to have you break it down, and we'll have a look and summarize this afterwards. So one group will get that clause, which I know it's the chunky one. We will also have one group work on the representation clause. And when I say work on it, you're going to be talking about what's in there and talk about a way that you could describe this to a client so that a client would understand what you're talking about. And then I'll have one group work on the referral of properties. So really there's like 4 sections: the type, location, the commission, the representation, and the referral of properties. So 4 groups will be working on those. If you have a copy of this form in front of you, great. If not, I can certainly share it out to you in just a moment. Are you comfortable with your assignment? All right, I am going to break you into some groups. Group 1 will work on the first part. And by the way, it auto assigns the groups. I have no control over which group you're going to be in, which is going to be lots of fun. But group 1 will work on the first item, which is the location and property type. Group 2 will work on the commission. Group 3 will work on the representation. And the group 4 will work on the referral of properties. So I'll break you out into 4 groups. I'm opening the groups. You're going to be in your groups with some colleagues, and each of you can pick a spokesperson for when you're finished. And I'll visit each of you in your rooms in just a minute. Who have we got here? Mohammed, Bet, and Anya. Are you in a group or not in a group? Oh,
Hi, not near as intimidating as I thought, and thank God my textbooks are on my shelf. Can you hear me, Pam? Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
I'm muted.
Okay, cool. There was nobody there. I got to do this little exercise on my own, but then I realized what it was once I got pulled up my textbook because I didn't have a copy of it in front.
Sorry, I got called away.
No problem.
So I think you're back in the main, I don't think
I
you're,
know because I was just in the breakout room by myself and I was like, I've already I already did it. I mean, out of everybody in this group, I'm probably the most recent that's graduated from the course. So they hammered this stuff in. I just had to kind of take a look at it really quickly to see what number 4 was. Once I saw what it was very exciting because I understand that paragraph.
perfect. All right. So I gave everybody about 5 minutes. So let's see, it's quarter after. I'll give them like 2 minutes. I know that a couple of them were wrapping up. Thank heavens they didn't have to do all 4 because it would have taken a long time. And typically this activity would have been done with a role play where you would be practicing what you're actually saying. But I think we'll shorten it down a little bit. It's very important. I think that these activities are super important to help people realize that clients, we just gloss over all of this stuff. And the better you are at explaining this, the better it will be for the clients to understand what they're signing, and more likely they will be willing to sign as a client. And if they're not going to become a client, well, guess what? Maybe they're not the people that you want to work with either. I always say the goal is to get rid of them as soon as possible.
This is what I really look like.
All right, I'm going to call the groups back because I think they're just about done. So I'm going to close the breakout rooms and they will all be joining us back in the main room. We lost a few people though.
Yeah.
People who weren't properly equipped dropped off.
They heard breaking off into group work and panicked.
Mm-hmm. And that they actually have to do something and they panicked. All right, I'm closing the rooms. They're going to close in 60 seconds. Everybody will join us back in the main group. Welcome back. We're waiting for everybody to join us back in the main group. They should be here within a few seconds. How was that, Anya? Oh, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, this paragraph is that's why a lot of you don't want to sign the agency agreement because
Yep.
they really concerned about. So usually how I address, yeah, you say if you totally unsatisfied with my services, the contract will be canceled.
All right, I think everybody else is just joining us back from the breakout rooms. So now you know we can get quite sophisticated when it comes to doing Zoom training, right? We can make you do all the work that we would in a real classroom. I'm loving it. All right, so I think we've also had a few people drop off as well for whatever reason. I think some of them thought, as Heather said, they got scared when they found out they actually had to do some work. So I can only imagine out in their real estate careers, if they get scared when they have to do a bit of work, that's not so good. All right, so we have a few people left. So the first section, Heather, I believe that was you that did the first section. So how did you describe that to your client?
I'm sorry, are you talking, because you gave me section 4, which was referral, referral of properties.
Okay, sorry, I think it got mixed up because originally you were in group 1, but when I think you came back in, eventually you got into group 4 for some reason. And to me, you showed up as group 1. Did I have anybody who did section 1? No? Okay, I'll do section 1 then, which is great. And I'll call up the buyer rep. Okay, so in section 1 that we were talking about, it's the property type, the use, and the geographic location. So as you're talking to buyer client, you're describing to them that Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, the property type that you've indicated is a freehold home in ABC town. And so our contract is limited to those 2 elements. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer says, well, what about if we change our mind and we decide we're looking for a condo in the city of Toronto? Well, condo city of Toronto meets neither of those criteria. So you would then say, well, no, actually you'd be free to work with another brokerage if those were changed, if those were in addition to your criteria outside of what we had agreed to here. You could also, if you want to, do a secondary buyer representation agreement in order to accommodate those additional requests, or you could do an edit and have them initial those changes. But whatever is negotiated in here, this is what the buyer is obligated to you for. All right, so just remember that the property type and the geographic location are strictly what is negotiated here. This is a legal contract. This is what Mr. and Mrs. Buyer are obligated for. Now, I also think from my vantage point, describing it to Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that it actually presents them with an opportunity because many buyers are hesitant to sign a contract. However, if you identify that it's for this particular type of property, it also could ease them up to say, okay, so I can do that with somebody else. And the answer is totally correct. They can. So the time frame and the property use and location limit the elements within the contract. All right, so now we have the commission clause. The commission clause was a very meaty clause. Which group was working on the commission clause? Was that Bill and Anya?
Yes.
Okay, so how would you describe the commission clause to Mr. or Mrs. Buyer?
We were on also number 4. We also have to do number 4. So no commission clause.
Oh,
Can you get her to speak up?
We're not assigned to the commission clause. We were
Oh, okay.
Paragraph 4 also.
Okay. Which one were you doing, Suzanne?
I did commission.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So this is your clause to do.
Oh, you want me to do this?
Please, yeah. So you
Okay.
and Rosalind were working on this one.
I don't know where Rosalind is. Is she on?
I don't think so.
Okay, so I'll go through it.
Thank you.
I found this to be a very meaty clause. The way that I handled it was with 6 points, plus the last paragraph, which is in bold, which I didn't get to. So I'm just going to roughly summarize the 6 points
Okay.
in the commission clause. The first thing is it describes the amount of commission to be paid, whether it's going to be a percentage, a flat rate, or the lease commission, if it's a leased property.
Right.
The second thing it describes is the amount that we've agreed to here may be less or more than what the seller or listing agent is offering to pay.
Correct. Yep.
The next thing it reinforces is that even though the listing agent or seller is paying my commission, I am still working for you in your best interests.
Excellent.
The next thing it states is that the buyer, which is you, Mr. Client, will pay me this amount even if the seller doesn't. So it'll pay me, you will pay me either the shortfall if they don't pay the total amount that we've agreed to, or you'll pay the whole amount because the seller isn't paying it at all, such as a private sale. The next thing it talks about is the holdover, which is something that I think we always just kind of breeze over. And really the holdover clause, that means that if this agreement expires, now it doesn't say anything about terminating, it just says if this expires, the buyer is still obliged to pay me the commission or the difference between the amount that we've agreed on and the amount that maybe they've gone into an agreement with another agent. So if there's still a, if the total commission of say 2.5% is paid to another agent, then I don't get any during this holdover clause. But if it's a shortfall, if you only pay them 2%, we've agreed to 2.5%, you pay me 5% or a half a point. The next thing it states is that this is a really interesting clause, a paragraph, and I'm surprised to read this, that the commission is due anyway upon the completion as set out, I'm not sure where. So in this agreement, there is a completion date. And at this completion date, if you haven't bought anything or leased anything, you still owe me the commission plus the taxes, which I think is a bit peculiar. The last paragraph, which is the paragraph in bold, I didn't get to, so I'm not sure what that is.
So, okay, two elements. And by the way, I think dividing it out into 6 points is probably a really great way to bite off this very meaty and chunky clause. There's a couple of really good points in there. One, you're right about the statement of the commission owed, and that a deficiency or an extra amount could also be offered. The deficiency could mean that the buyer may have to pay something, but the extra amount actually doesn't state that there's, what happens with that. It only states that there's a deficiency. So that particular clause is kind of a little bit confusing from that standpoint, and you may get that question. With the holdover, the only element about the holdover is that it would be properties, so that if the buyer enters into a new buyer rep with another registered real estate brokerage after the expiration, and the buyer's liability to pay commission to that brokerage shall reduce the amount paid to the other brokerage. But this also has to do with properties that you've shown as well, to purchase or lease introduced to the buyer. By you, so by us as the buyer's rep. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if they go buy something else that you're going to get anything. It's properties that you've introduced the client to during that holdover period. Does anybody have a recommendation on what they typically do for holdover timeframes?
I just put 0.
Do you
Yeah.
put 0 typically?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want it done. I don't, I'm not going to chase them.
Yeah, and it's also, I know that it is very difficult to find out if they actually did something.
Yeah.
And as well, keep in mind that the currency of this contract has to do with that property type and location as well. So you can't have blanket statements that would hold somebody in here, 5 to 10 days, 20 days. I've seen, I think Roy St. John holds them for a long time, but he's got a very specialized client base who's got a very specialized need. So he may do, a 12-month contract with a 6-month holdover. But it all depends. So it's interesting. I just wanted to get some feedback on that. This has to do that if the transaction gets to the closing date and the buyer does not complete it for some reason, that then you are still owed commission.
Where is the completion date set out in this agreement?
So the completion date, it has to do with the completion date of an agreement of purchase and sale. Because remember, yeah. So the completion date has to do with the agreement of purchase and sale.
Okay.
And that if the buyer gets to the date of closing and don't close for whatever reason, you are still owed the commission. Now, how are you going to get the commission is probably that'll come on Jamie's hands to help us with that particular element, but you would still be eligible for that. And then let's see. So this agreement applies for the purchase or lease of real property. This is the bolded statement. Notwithstanding the foregoing, in the event that the buyer leases a property, this agreement remains in force as set out herein for the purchase of leased property or a property that in general description indicated above. The leasing of the property by the buyer does not terminate this agreement with respect to the purchase of a property. So if they lease, they can also buy. If you've got both of those elements in terms of the commission for leasing or buying, they could be held accountable still for the buy element of it.
Okay, now I want to give 2 examples. These are commission side deals that I am currently in. And I'm going to tell you how I handled the first one, and then you can tell me how I should have handled it, because I think if I'd done this differently, if I'd used this form, then I think it would be a better way of handling. Anyway, so I sold a pre-construction like 4 years ago at 488 University.
Yep.
That property is now closing. Back 4 years ago, I said to the client, I said, okay, yeah, sure, I'll pay you your lawyer fees out of my commission. So the commission on the building as offered by the builder is 4%. I haven't got any of that so far, so it's closing tomorrow. I told him I'd pay him $1,700. So the guy calls me up like last week and says, okay, we're closing. How are we going to deal with this? What do you think I did? I just sent him $1,700.
Right.
Which is kind of stupid. So what I'm thinking is what I should have done is use this form, replace my previous buyer agency document, and identified the commission here saying that I'm going to be paid 4% of the sale of the property, but I also am, or maybe I could say 4% of 4% of net price less $1,700, which is credited to buyer, plus HST. That's what I should have done instead of just sending them the money on email.
Yeah, well, and when you just send him the money too, you're now going to be paying taxes on that 1,700, and he's got 1,700 tax free. So we do have another system for that, like another document that would have allowed you to send him the money. He would have acknowledged that he received 1,700 as income, and you received 1,700 as a buyer gift or a buyer incentive or whatever, but then you could have written that money off instead of having to pay taxes on it. I know it's only 1,700, but you can imagine, say you do this with several clients in a year, it could add up a little bit. The other thing too is what you were clear about that, but maybe there was nothing in writing that stated that he would get the 1,700 paid out of commissions received by you, but you haven't received any commissions. So now you've paid out and you're waiting and waiting and waiting for money to come, and you haven't received money. You haven't received the money.
Well, maybe on a builder commission, because we don't see that until a month. Like I don't even know when that builder is going to pay us, right?
Yeah, it could be a month to 60 days down the road. But
okay, so
your client, if it had been written in such a way, you could have written it in such a way that the incentive was built in there. You can also use a schedule to this document too, and just create a schedule that offers the lease back. Sorry, not the lease back. The cash back incentive.
Okay.
Can you not ask for a receipt or like follow up, maybe just to get a receipt for that so you can use it in your taxes? Because that
we have a form for that. Yeah, we have a form for that.
I think you should follow up to just sort of say, hey, you know what, can I get a, something as a receipt for that? Because that doesn't seem right.
Yeah,
well,
we do have a form for that, Suzanne. And if you can't find it in the resources, I'll certainly help you find it. It's either in my docs in DocuSign transaction room or in the forms element.
Okay, now the other one that I did was, okay, so the client sold with me and then purchased with me. And so I agreed to give her 1% back on the purchase price. So I was trying to deal with that yesterday, and the lawyer for my client, the buyer, said, redo the confirmation of co-op and put an amendment in stating that 1% of your commission is going to go toward, is going to be credited by the seller to the buyer. So essentially it saves the seller on HST on that 1% of my commission.
And the good thing about that is then, therefore, there's no commission paid to you that would increase your taxable earnings. So that's actually probably done pretty well.
Yeah, it's just, I'm still waiting for that to come back. It's just I did this once before where I was giving the buyer $10,000. It turned out that I was double ending. It was like $1 million deal. It was like a great thing, but I was double ending $1 million deal, and I was giving $10,000 of my commission back to the buyer. And it turned out my wording was wrong, and I ended up paying I screwed that one up. I don't know what happened. I think I didn't get 20. Not only did I sound like I was crediting them, but I was also reducing my commission. So the wording is really sticky on that.
Yeah, and this is really where Jamie and I are here to help, and Roy as well. Like they've been, Jamie and Roy have been through many of these types of situations. So certainly if you're not 100% sure of wording and you don't know where to send it to me. And if I don't know, I will definitely get Roy or Jamie to review things just to double check, because our goal is to make sure that you make as much money as possible. When you're successful, we're successful.
Yeah, and I think it's really important because today I know a lot of agents are giving back some of their commission on a buy or a sell. And sometimes you have to use that as a negotiating factor, to get the deal done.
And certainly that can kick in. It's a shame. In general, I would say, that's not what you do. Like, you don't go to your lawyer or your accountant and ask for money back on your services. However, for some reason, people feel that realtors are fair game.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
Yeah. All right. So who was working on, you're welcome. Who was working on the representation? I think that was Ken Lee, but I don't know if he's still here or not. I don't know if Ken's still here. Okay, well, let's skip down to referral of properties, because I know, Heather, you're here. So let's come down to referral of properties.
Well, I like this one because basically it's the whole sort of acting in good faith idea that whatever the clients find, they're going to bring it to you to show it to them. And the whole idea is that, and also this one gets a little bit sticky because it's also where you kind of get back to the commission, where if they buy something, in the holdover period, then they owe you the commission for it, and it's to be payable within 5 days of the brokerage written demand. So it's just basically, and this, I'm sure we all have this happen where people get in touch with us saying, oh, I just found this really great place. And then you make the arrangements to go see it. And we're there to help with the negotiations and help give them advice as to whether or not it's a good idea or not. It's, theoretically, we're being paid the big bucks to say no or yes. And so that's what the referral of properties is about.
Excellent. Yeah. So very well done. I like that. Very well. All right. So the section that we didn't get covered, because I think our person that was covering it is gone, is the representation section. And you'll notice that there's kind of 3 sections to it. There's the representation in general, there's the multiple representation section, and then the multiple representation in customer service. So although we tend to figure we know this stuff easily, remember, our clients don't understand what all of this stuff means. So explaining to a client is very important. And a good example of this might be that, so let's say Suzanne and I are out hunting for $1 million condos for clients. Well, if you notice, our clients' needs are probably very similar. So it could be that when there's a listing out there, we could both have buyer clients who are very much interested in that one particular property. If we both put in offers, the brokerage is now in multiple representation because both of our clients are now looking at the same property and putting in offers. We've got buyer agreements with both of them and they're looking at the same thing. So that is one element of the buyer representation agreement that you may want to explain, that multiple representation does not just happen when you represent the seller and the buyer. It could happen where the brokerage represents two buyers who are looking at the same type of property. So you may want to take a deep dive, look at this again, and just walk through what this could mean. The element of multiple representation and customer service. So the buyer understands and agrees that the brokerage also provides representation and customer service to other buyers and sellers. If the brokerage represents or provides customer service to more than one seller or buyer for the same trade, same property, the brokerage shall, in writing at the earliest practical opportunity and before any offer is made, inform all sellers and buyers of the nature of the brokerage's relationship to each seller and buyer. So again, we have to inform them when we do work with people that are interested in the same trade, Now, in the case of the two buyers though, I did receive a call from one of the RE/MAX brokerages up in York region. He called me and said, could you let agent this person and that person know that they are in multiple representation with regards to this address? So they wouldn't have known until the listing brokerage called me and let me know to inform them that they were now in multiple rep. So multiple rep, a lot of people just think it's double ending and making two commissions, but it is a lot different than that. It could be that, but double ending and multiple rep, it just coincidentally, they would fall in under the same thing. But it doesn't necessarily just mean that. Multiple rep extends beyond just double ending a transaction. So I wanted to take a really good look at the buyer rep before I continue. And how are we doing for time? I know we're over our time limit, but the next part of my presentation is pretty quick. So I'm going to switch out of this and head back to the meeting for a second. And who have I got left? I see Gary here. Welcome. All right, so in talking about how I do my virtual buyer consultations, this is where I start. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, thank you so much for meeting me today. I know that it would be nice if we could meet in person. However, due to health and safety factors, I'm going to take time now to review with you what's involved in working together to find the property that you're looking for, exploring your options, and setting an action plan. So I'd like to take a moment or two now just to describe a little bit about our team. So the team has a strong focus on client success, and we are award-winning realtors. A few of the elements that we are going to be talking about that are very important are where you would like to live, with whom will you be moving, if you have any concerns with regards to commute, price, financing, or style of property, those things would all be very important for us to identify right now. And then the last element would be, tell me a little bit about your must-haves or nice-to-have list. Now, I know that you may not have thought about all of that right now. However, as you continue to talk with me, you may come up with some items, or I'll follow up with you to find out if you have a must-haves or a nice-to-have list. So just coming off my script here, remember the where and the style are part of the buyer representation agreement. So those things are critical to get that information. The other stuff is starting to build that rapport with the client. All right, so I know that you've identified that you're fairly flexible in location. So this is a map of a lot of the areas. I know that typically I cover in the downtown Toronto area, but I have colleagues that work in other areas as well. So depending on where you work, what you're planning to do, the purpose of the property, we may want to narrow down location. I'd also recommend that if you're choosing a location, that you consider what it is you do on a daily basis. For example, if you work downtown and are going to be commuting from your new home, well, a commute time from, say, Hamilton to downtown could be 90 minutes to 2 hours on a good day. And so, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that's going to be 20 hours a week in potential commute time. You will find better prices, but you're going to be losing in that element of the commuting time. But it all depends. Now, you've identified that you quickly identified that you're looking for properties in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, 2-bedroom, 2 bathrooms as a minimum, and you prefer freeholds, not condos. So I did a quick search for you, and all these red dots actually represent different properties that could potentially meet your needs. And you can see that there really isn't much right in the Toronto area. I have to kind of go a little bit further out in order to find things. So again, I'm going all the way out to Bowmanville to find stuff, and all the way down to St. Catharines, out to Kitchener, but there's very few. If we look at Mississauga, Oakville, Burlington, there's very few options. How do you feel about those particular locations in terms of could they meet your needs? All right, so narrowing down some of the locations, again, we talked a little bit about the commute times, but you can see that there's also a number of different properties. In this particular target area that I've focused for you, there are actually 105 options. So that certainly gives us a lot to explore and look at to be able to determine what will work for us. I found this one as an example, and I thought I'd just share with you. So if you happen to be looking at remax.ca, I can send you some listings from here, but here's an example of a lovely property that would certainly fall within your price point, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, and you know, certainly we could look at things like photos. This is a screen caption, but I could certainly help you look at photos of this particular property. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, what do you think about something like this? And they tell me they love it. They don't love it. They say, where's Ancaster? They ask me questions. We dialogue. We go and have a look at other options as well. For this, I found the nicest one in all of the 105 to show them. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I have a number of tools available for you as a follow-up to our conversation today. I've got a buyer guide, and this is a link to the buyer guide. I've got some great buyer tips to help you, and I've also got an area where you could start doing some searches on your own. So those are some tools that are available to you, and you can click on these as you look at them. Here, for example, is the search. So when you come into my website, you'll be able to search in here. So right on the front page, there's a search bar. You can type in an address or a city and be able to search, and it will find you some properties that you might be interested in looking at. I will also be doing a search, and as we talk about the buyer representation agreement, something else that I can provide to you is access to a service and a tool called Collaborate. And Collaborate is something that I do provide to my clients. I'd like to walk you through the process of what the buyer representation agreement looks like, and then give you an opportunity to consider if becoming a client is what you would like to do. And that is the end of my presentation. So the buyer presentation starts here. And it's a few short slides, just talking a little bit. It's a consultation. So here's this slide here has your consultation elements. Then talking a little bit about location, where, so we can target some of those things. If they've given me a bit of idea, these are screen captions, but you could easily switch screens in Zoom to go over to Stratus and show them a few options. This one was actually done for an actual client. I recorded it and posted it on YouTube for the client, then send them the link. So this was definitely a virtual presentation because I just talked through it. And from there, they were able to have access to whatever it is they needed. So you can see how all the bits and pieces fit together but I'm delighted to answer any questions that you may have.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
Of course, I always have questions. So when you are negotiating with that prospective buyer client and you are trying to get their golden signature on your buyer agreement, there's 2 things that you can offer them, which is a win-win for them. Except I don't know what they are. So the first thing that a client relationship offers that buyer is to carry out the client's request. But could you give me an example of what that would be?
So a client's request could be, again, when you come back to, remember that short list of just the summary items? So the mandate, say for example, the client wants to get information with regards to condo fees, what it includes. All of those would be research that you might be able to do, whereas for a customer, you would not be doing that.
Okay. The other one is that I'm going to act in person on their behalf. So give me an example where that applies.
So acting in person on their behalf. Well, I think that's just when you're talking to the listing sales representative, you're able to say, my client has indicated, and whatever it is they've told you. And you're able to say that on behalf of your client because they've indicated that this is what you would like to do.
Okay, I think, yeah, it might have something to do with the actual definition of representation. So now just correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you are representing a buyer under a signed buyer agency agreement, then you are representing their interests.
Correct.
So if you are acting out in person, or if you are acting in person on behalf of that buyer client, I just want to know some examples of that. Like,
so I'd be delighted to open it up. Does anybody have some examples that they want to share? I'm just one person, but as a group, we probably have other examples.
if you're acting in person on behalf of a buyer, what would that really mean to a client or versus a customer? So if you've got a customer and you're trying to turn them into a client, and you're going to say to him, hey, listen, I'm going to act in your best interests. I'm going to act in person. Is it synonymous that way? Is acting in person meaning the same as acting in their best interests?
No, it's not. I mean, acting in person is to me physical. I'm physically present to do certain activities, but acting on their best interest, you're doing that always. You're always doing that. Whereas it's easier to say what you're not doing when it comes to a customer. So for example, with a customer, you are not doing the extra research. If they want to know what goes into the condo fees, they've chosen to be a customer. They've not chosen for you to do that extra work for them. So they have to do that on their own. And we have to be able to say, that goes beyond the scope of our arrangement together. You've requested for me to prepare your paperwork. I'm delighted to do that. Whatever you want on the paperwork, fine, I will put that down. However, it does not extend beyond doing additional research. If you would like that extra service, we could certainly make a change to your relationship with our brokerage, and we could sign you as a client. Would you like some additional services? And there's no additional cost to you.
I've heard agents negotiate to get that buyer agency signed by saying to the prospective client, hey, listen, I work with buyers and they're either clients or customers. Every day I'll get a list of new hot properties available for sale. I'm going to address my clients first and my customers second. So
Yes.
If you want priority with me, you're going to have to sign a client buyer representation agreement.
And that's how Roy St. John does it, and that's how I like to do it. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
And he almost does that word for word as what you described, Suzanne.
Oh, maybe he was the one who told me.
Yeah. And so, again, it takes a lot of confidence, but keep in mind that we are getting ripped off every day. We're, as real estate salespeople and brokers, we get ripped off all the time. People want us to go show them this, show them that, like, oh, it'll be fun for us. But that is the nature of our business and the work that we do. It is not fun. This is business for us.
I know.
I mean, it could
Yeah.
be fun. It could be business is also fun, but just to go and do it for fun is not what, you know, we don't get paid for that.
Yeah.
So for people to understand that we take this seriously, to treat our documentation seriously, and to treat our clients as if we were any other professional, like a lawyer would sit down and have a consultation with people. An accountant would typically sit down and have a consultation with somebody. Well, guess what? We need to do that too. So I'm seeing more and more on some of these, like I said, Facebook groups where they are actually doing things. More and more people are kind of scolding us if we're not sitting down and doing things more formally. So I think it's important for us to pull up our bootstraps and follow procedures. Only we can help to create the appearance of being a profession and not just a service.
Yeah.
So I thought today was a pretty important topic. I know that once Arlene gets started, I'm hoping that we're going to do something on the listing side as well, very similarly. However, I think that this one is a pretty important topic because many of us gloss over the buyer rep. And if the buyer rep chases somebody away, that is excellent. Because if they're not going to treat you right, if they're not going to treat you as the professional that you are, then guess what? You don't want them as a client anyhow. You don't want to have to be a customer, have them as a customer either. So if the buyer rep scares them away, that's a good thing. Bye-bye. You know, that's what you would say. And there will be somebody else, and eventually you will get better quality clients. You will get the clients that actually want to work with you and are excited about the process. But it starts with us being able to describe things correctly and be able to just, you know, talk them and walk them through the paperwork so that they respect us as the professionals that we are. I just feel so strongly about that. It's passionate for me. I want us all to be amazing, but in order for us to do that, we have to walk the talk.
We have to beat them up a bit.
with nice feathers. We're beating them up with feathers.
I don't know. I think, you know, too many times I hear, oh, Suzanne, she's a nice person. She won't mind if we go work with somebody else. Oh.
Yeah, and I lost recently a couple of buyer deals where, again, same thing. It's like you started behaving like you're in a contract with them and you're not, and then they call you and say, well, you know, we were trying to do a contract for this particular location. They were afraid to sign. Well, guess what? Had we explained that, we probably would have gotten rid of them much earlier and not wasted 10 trips up to Mississauga, only to have them buy in Oakville. That's fine. If you want to have another representative helping you in Oakville, that's fine. We can narrow down the scope of our contract, but I want to have something in writing that guarantees and protects me to know that I'm doing the right thing. So again, this is part of the reason why I thought this was really important. And this is the new way that realtors are being trained. So sales representatives are coming out of the new program with a strong understanding of the buyer rep. I don't want them to jump the queue on us, be better at this than us. I want us to be just as good. All right, I'd love to wrap things up. I know it's been about an hour and a half, which I guess 90 minutes is what we used to do anyhow. I think I was overly ambitious to think I could do it in an hour. But did you have any other questions for me? Was there anything else that you thought you would like to ask?